As I understand it, a full New South Wales statewide lockdown will be under consideration by the Crisis Committee meeting of the New South Wales Cabinet this afternoon after the virus spread to Dubbo. Certainly this is something the Deputy Premier John Barilaro is expected to push for. The concern is that once it has hit Dubbo, which went into lockdown an hour or two ago, that's the gateway to the west of the state. We've now had Byron Bay, the Hunter, Armidale, Tamworth and Dubbo impacted by coronavirus in this outbreak. It seems New South Wales Health are getting the hint from sewerage samples that the virus is more widespread than the numbers are showing and is following those leads and identifying further cases. The discussion on broader restrictions comes this afternoon after the New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian finally gave a date for a likely proper reopening of Sydney this morning, a date I first speculated on Sunday agenda, November.
I do want to foreshadow that, as per the Doherty report, 2 doses of 70% vaccination New South Wales will hit, if we keep the current pace, we hit that around the end of October and we hit 80% double doses towards the middle of November.
So the Victorian lockdown last year was about 120 days, looking similar here, 2 to 3 months more of lockdown. That's what the people of Sydney and parts of New South Wales have to get through here. It is a long time for kids out of school. I repeat again, tighter restrictions could help to drive those numbers down before then, even if only put in place for 3 to 4 weeks. And the more those numbers go down as opposed to up, where they are still headed, the better for reopening. That is what Scott Morrison is pushing for, including in question time again.
Right now, we need to focus on the achievements that are necessary in the first phase, and that is to suppress the virus. Because the stronger we go into the next phase, Mr. Speaker, the better it will be.
And you can see why when you look at the Singapore example. 79% have had a first dose in that city-state and 70% double-dose vaccination. And with the Delta strain, they have still been subject to partial lockdowns, only just lifted this week. There are still some restrictions in place. The key is, if you cannot extinguish the virus, to get the numbers as low as possible before you get to 80% double vaccination and open up, because the unvaccinated and children can still get infected and still cause problems for your hospital system. The vaccination alone is not a golden ticket in a truly open scenario. Meanwhile, in Victoria today, the Premier Daniel Andrews extended his lockdown by a week after another 20 cases. The good news was a lot of them were in isolation during infectivity.
That's why, sadly, today the Cabinet of the Government, we have met and we have determined to accept the advice of the Chief Health Officer to extend for a further period of 7 days till 11:59 p.m. next Thursday. The extreme infectivity of this virus and the fact that within a very short space of time, if we were to open, then we would see cases akin to what's happening tragically in Sydney right now.
And Andrews appeared to have a dig again at New South Wales and the lack of a ring of steel around Sydney in terms of why tough border restrictions with New South Wales on the southern border have to be put in place.
And before anyone says, oh, why would you do that? If this virus can get from Sydney to Byron Bay, to Dubbo, to Armidale, to Tamworth, then only a fool would think that it couldn't get to Albury.
One of the problems in New South Wales is around messaging. Ironic, given that ministers have expressed frustration that they are contacted by the Premier's office each day and told about the messaging for today. Well, the messaging shouldn't change day to day. This is not an election campaign. Berejiklian for days has been rattling on about things being able to open up at the end of August, particularly at 50% first dose vaccination. It is clearly important to get people vaccinated, but concentrating on vaccination puts the political heat caused by this lockdown onto the federal government rather than the state government. It also, I would argue, stops people taking the lockdown seriously.
Lockdown plus some level of easing of restrictions is possible once we get to 50% or 60% rates of vaccination. 6 million jabs is roughly half the population with at least 1 or 2 doses. 6 million jabs by the end of August. It's really important for us to have the tools available to us so that we can consider what life looks like beyond August 28.
Berejiklian's also been saying the settings were right on getting numbers of coronavirus cases down when they clearly are not in terms of driving numbers down.
Whilst the case numbers are bouncing around, we are seeing a stabilisation. They are not growing exponentially. That tells us that the settings we have in place are having an impact. We're working really hard to make sure not only that we put the right settings in place, but also that we provide people with the financial support they need. The health settings are critical.
Well, in the last month alone, they've had more than 5,000 cases and more than 2,000 of them come from an unknown source. Today, the Premier was challenged by Sky's Danica De Giorgio following Kerry Chant's evidence, the evidence of the Chief Health Officer, before a parliamentary committee that you could not come out of lockdown until at least 70% double vaccinated.
We need that 70% before we have too much of a discussion about what easing restrictions look like.
Why do you keep on insisting that 50% could be enough to ease some restrictions?
Can I just say, Dr Chant and I have been absolutely aligned on this issue. The Doherty report says that if you want significant freedoms, you need 70% of your population fully vaccinated.
So they're aligned, apparently. I'm going to draw your attention now to an article in the Sydney Morning Herald this morning, quoting the Deputy Chief Executive of the Committee for Sydney, who was Gladys Berejiklian's Director of Strategy and her closest staff confidant until a few months ago. It says, we can't just be held back by states that want to keep things closed forever. We need to start opening things up here. And Vezade says, we can't be led by the lowest common denominator. We need to be able to show the way. We need to inspire the other states. The article was promoting vaccine passports, but it really looks like a let-it-rip policy. Last year, Premiers Palaszczuk, McGowan, Gutwein and Marshall were thanked by their populaces for keeping us safe. Gladys Berejiklian was thanked again and again because of the Melbourne experience for keeping us open. And that's the problem the people of Sydney have now. The mindset of the New South Wales Premier, affected by all that praise and the positive polling, keeping it open got her, Kieran.